This podcast is part of the Spoon Podcast Network, home of smart conversations that feed your mind.
Danny, thank you so much for being here.
Well, I appreciate it, Eric. I always look forward to intriguing conversations like I expect us to have.
Well, listen, I'm going to jump right in because you've spoken about this ad nauseum, and I'm curious from your standpoint. I've had numerous conversations on this show and with others, with plant-based advocates, folks that advocate for other alternatives, and there's no shortage of evidence that plant-based is a great choice for the planet and health. I don't think there's any debate about that.
Well,
but no one has really, in my opinion. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I said don't forget the animals as well.
Sure.
That's an easy.
You're right. I guess, okay, the point I'm trying to make is that no one's, in my opinion, and again, I could be wrong, that no one has really made a compelling case that meaningfully switches omnivores like myself over in large and sustained numbers to a dedicated plant-based diet. I think we've seen it's increased over time, but we haven't seen that. What's that tipping point? I'm curious what you think, what you're seeing, and what's winning the day from getting people to see that plants are a really good path for diet, planet, and, as you say, animals.
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually love this question because there's a real logical answer, and I'm going to give it to you. The answer stems from kind of the mistakes that we've made in plant-based over the past few years, which is, spending a lot of money in marketing and PR to explode the industry in a way where it kind of reversed on us. We had a lot of influencers, athletes, stars, movie stars, and so on and so forth out there pushing it because they were getting paid to push it, right? And so what happens when you've got somebody that's got 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, 30 million followers is the followers jump on board. They go out and try the products. We see a little spike or big spike like we saw a couple of years ago. And then they move on to the next thing, right? Maybe we have some traction and a few of them stick with it. And some of them say, yeah, this is great. But once that star, that influencer moves on to the next thing, they move on to the next thing. And I think we saw a lot of that. There was a lot of intrigue and interest in the industry because we were doing something that really hadn't been done in the way it was done in the past several years. But here's my real answer to that question. And I think it will be logical when you hear it. I don't think there's any question that the greatest followers of the plant-based industry as a whole, and specifically plant-based meats that I'm involved in, are the millennial generation. So that's the generation right now that is between the ages of, now don't quote me on this, I think somewhere between 28 and 43 or 44 years of age. So they jumped on board better than most generations, certainly better than the boomers or the X gen, and the other generations are just kind of clicking in gear right now, which would be this Generation Z, I think, right after the millennials, which are getting into that age. But the millennials are key here. And the reason they're key is because they get it, right? They don't all do it, but they get it. They are having babies now or have had babies, and those babies are growing up already knowing all about, we don't have to educate them. We don't have to teach them about what we're doing, why we're doing, and how we're doing it. They already know that. So they're jumping on board. And when I talk about grassroots, that's real grassroots. We will see an extended period of time from now until the day that you and I are gone, that there will just be a natural grassroots movement. And it's kind of funny I say grassroots because it's plant-based, right? But there will be that natural movement where we see generation after generation adhering to and buying these type of products, enjoying it, and it becomes part of their regular diet. And that's already started. So we just have to be patient. It's happening, it's coming, and there's nothing that's going to stop it from happening. It's going to happen, and we're already seeing that happen.
There's something interesting in what you said, and I want to unpack that just a little bit. And again, the presumption is that influencers worked or do work, one, it seems like they do work. It's just when their attention is spread to something else or move on, then it doesn't. And I'm curious to think here, like, if you agree with that, why? And two, um, that there is, so that implies that there is a playbook that could be used, that people do listen to certain people on what to eat. And I'm curious, where do you think most people are getting their health and nutrition knowledge?
Well, yeah, influencers definitely work. The challenge there, in my opinion, is it tends to be short lived. It's whatever the coolest, hippest, newest thing is, and they're going to jump on board because that's what drives their audience. They want to know what's going on. They jump on board. They do it. It sticks to something. You're throwing a bunch of stuff against the wall, right? What sticks, right? That's what influencers do. They throw as much as they can against the wall, and hopefully something will stick. If it doesn't, it doesn't matter to them. They just got paid for influencing, right? That's their job, is to influence. And hopefully they're doing the right thing. Hopefully they're doing it because they believe in it. I'm not sure that's always true. And well, look, we know it's not always true. Some of them are just in it for the payday. Some of are in it because they truly believe in it and they stick by it. And those are the influencers that help the industry over the long term. Now, what was the second part of that question? I forgot already.
So no, it's fair. It goes to kind of what the back half of your answer, which is sort of like, there's a playbook then, it sounds like, that you think works, and it just needs to be implemented maybe differently, or maybe a longer term approach. I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, look, I think the plant-based industry hopefully learned its lesson, that dumping tens of millions of dollars, and that is exactly what we saw several years ago. Tens of millions of dollars for high-profile influencers was probably not the best choice. I mean, the industry ballooned and then it exploded, right? And now we're trying to find our balance on the way back up. But the influencers that work are the influencers that are truly interested in what you have to share. Whether it's a plant-based product or anything else on the market, and it doesn't even have to be a product. It could be something about the person itself. The ones that are intimately involved, that's where that playbook works over the extended period of time, is somebody that's truly, and look, they don't have to be a vegan or even a vegetarian. They just have to believe in what they're promoting. Right. And again, nothing against these mega influencers that may be, a superstar, whether they're a movie star, television star, an athlete, or just a big influencer. Many of them are in the game and do it because they get a big payday to talk about something.
It also brings up, I think, another aspect that I'm sure you're intimately familiar with, which is price and availability. I have this hypothesis that it could be very simple, actually, that to switch anyone over to something, you have to meet a couple of key criteria. One is baseline safety. That's a presumption. But then the two that I think people have control over is like pricing and availability. And I've spoken with other guests about this, but it seems like in some ways people don't really grasp, people in the plant industry do, but people don't really grasp how large the food industry really is, and what's considered large scale production in the millions of pounds of something per month to be considered like on the low end of large, and how much infrastructure it takes to produce something that anyone can get at any time for the right price. Do you think that's contributing at all to some of the, let's say, like slower adoption of some of these plant-based products, or do you think there's something else at play or in addition to that?
Well, I wish it was singular. It's not. There are certainly more than one thing that plays into this adoption. One is just accepting that it's something different and that it is better for you, regardless of the noise that you hear one way or the other regarding that. I think that was established at the beginning of this. It shouldn't be a question that these are products that are better for you. Now the question is it something that you would eat and that you would enjoy? And that's the challenge of our industry. We have to produce something that is actually delicious, that people want to eat and buy in and enjoy. Yeah, the vegans, the vegetarians are going to eat these products. They're a great option for them, especially for those who are challenged by the fact that maybe at one point in time they were meat eaters and they really enjoy those comfort foods, and just eating veggies, whole veggies don't complete them, if that makes sense, right? So there's that. But on the flip side of it all, we all have to think about what it costs to make these things. And so being able, as you said, being able to scale up to very large volumes will drop the price of these products. And hopefully at the same time we're doing that, I think we're seeing it, is we're getting better at making them. Now, there's that question. Hey, this is a processed product. Yes, it is. I won't deny it. These are processed products, but so is probably 95% of what everybody eats in the country. It doesn't, even if you're having ground beef, that's been processed. And there's something about that the average consumer is challenged by, and we have to overcome that. We have to educate the consumer to say, yes, we're not going to deny that we have processed products, but the process that we do here is as clean as we can make it, with products or ingredients that are as clean as we can make them, to create something that is mimicking something else. Whether it's a plant-based meat or a dairy or something else in the market, we are mimicking an animal-based product. And that is not an easy thing to do. It can be costly, especially when we're talking about scaling up. And the other challenge that isn't really spoken about a lot is most of the companies that are in the plant-based industry are fairly small compared to actual other food manufacturers out there that are manufacturing products that are animal-based, and really small, really, compared to most of them. So they find themselves in a position that they can't afford to build their own plant, their own manufacturing facility, and they have to go somewhere else and have somebody make it for them. There's an additional cost, and there's a challenge of being consistent doing that. I'm fortunate that we actually make our own products, but we're one of the few. Even the big ones out there have co-packers that make it for them. And that is part of the scaling up process. Do you grow at the pace that you can grow, or do you grow beyond that pace and have to have somebody else to help you? And that's what most of the plant-based industry works with today.
You bring up an interesting point also around processing. And as you know, like, there's been a pretty dedicated campaign, which I would argue is quite successful, in sort of relabeling a lot of these plant-based, burger mimics or what have you, as ultra processed. Whether that's true or not, I think that's separate, but I think the campaign has been successful. That said, I think most people don't realize, and if you're listening right now, that almost all your foods are processed. And processing isn't inherently bad. I like to just change the word. Processing should be substituted really for the words making something safer and making it more nutritious. That is the intended purpose, I think, often of this. And safety could also be shelf stable. The problem we get into is when we decide we need something to last on a shelf indefinitely, or we need it to have a very specific, consistent profile, and we strip out everything else out of it. And that's when we get into ultra processing. But you're right. Like, ground beef is processed, and I just don't think people realize that the degree of processing is variable. But almost all food is processed, and that plant-based products arguably are less processed than many of the other processed foods that people consume every day. With that said, do you believe that there's a counter narrative that needs to be said in the plant-based side, or where are consumers getting this ultra processed narrative maybe?
Well, like any other industry that is growing or trying to grow and work its way in and perhaps take a piece of another industry, there's going to be somebody out there that's going to dig as deep as they can to find something wrong with what you're doing. So, that's what we're seeing right now. Where exactly that's coming from, I would say probably the meat industry, the dairy industry, digging down deeper, the dairy farmers, probably the cattlemen, because actually the meat industry, many of them have bought into this. When you look at some, Tyson or some of these other big meat manufacturers out there, they want to be on board because they want every piece of the industry, right? So if you're talking about meat, whether it's plant-based meat or it's animal-based protein or something else, cultivated meat in the future, they want to be on board because they're just producing meat, right? They're getting the meat from the cattle, or they're getting it from plants, right? Most of them don't care. They just want to be able to sell, right? And if there's a piece in the industry, they want a piece of it. So I think we dig a little bit deeper and say, perhaps it's coming from the actual cattlemen or the dairy farmers and others out there that are concerned about their livelihoods. The actual truth to all that is we're just a blip on the map. I mean, it's just so minimal, the portion of the industry. We're in the millions. They're in the multiple billions, of dollars, and we're not even remotely close to taking a larger portion of the business. Now, the dairy industry, the plant-based milks have done a pretty good job of that. Because they're at I don't know 11-12%, or maybe a 1%, and we got a long way to go to even make a dent. So being preemptive on their end, I get it. They're trying to protect their own, but there's enough room for all of us. The one thing we all have to remember is in a few years, and I say a few years because I'm talking about maybe 25 years from now, it's 2050. We've got 9 billion people on this planet. We can't feed them all with animal-based proteins. We don't have the ability to do that. We don't have the land mass to do that. We just don't. And so we all have to think about what's the next step. What do we have to do that's a healthy choice to provide another protein? And there couldn't be a better obvious choice right in front of us right now, which is plant-based.
You could argue that the ultra-processed narrative was a successful influence campaign, if you want to look at it that way. And I agree, in my experiences as well with the conventional meat industry, the incumbents, I agree with your assessment. They all want to feed more people. Like they are on board with how do we feed more people? And that's going to take innovation. All of them are on board with this.
Yeah.
So I think there's like an immense amount of common ground in just going, we got to get nutritious food into people's mouths. And there's potentially a very vocal minority that really, really rails against anything that sits adjacent in their minds to their own industry. And instead of thinking it's an or, like I must choose this or that, instead of seeing it as an and choice. I have this option and this option if I want that. And I think you're right. Some of the companies like Cargill and Tyson really see this as an and, not an or solution.
Yeah, I agree. Look, the meat industry is not, they're not going down in business. Their business is growing too. So, I mean, we've already shown that we can work in tandem here and grow together. Now the question is can we stop being petty and worrying about what the other one's doing and just focus on what we're doing to produce the healthiest, best product for the consumer and do it together? I hope that we can. I mean, it's a battle that's not a fair battle to start with, because we don't get any subsidies or anything to help us do what we do. Whereas the meat and the dairy and the pork industry, they all get subsidies from the government to help them. So we're out there on this lone island trying to do the best that we can to produce something that's necessary for us as human beings to survive, and grow and be healthy. And we're challenged by that. And I hope as time goes on, people just think of this as just part of the natural thing that's being produced amongst other things that are being produced for us to sustain our own personal health and make choices.
I think that it seems to me, if I put my incumbent meat producer hat on and try to pretend I'm one of them, I think the issues are not with like the products. I think if I were to summarize or try to paraphrase what I see, It's more that, for example, it has to do with, and this is kind of in the weeds, but like labeling protections. There's strict labeling in the US. There's strict labeling requirements for meat and poultry products that are regulated by US Department of Agriculture, USDA. But plant-based products are regulated by FDA. And FDA, while has, effectively the same rules and regulations, their ability to enforce them is not the same. You don't have to get an approval for your label the same way you do at USDA. It's enforced differently. And I think that the claims that I hear most often are, I just wish that they wish that the playing field were level from that standpoint. And I think from the plant-based side, that, like you said, they want the playing field to be level, from like maybe a subsidy standpoint or from a claim standpoint. I'm curious what you're seeing from not only your business but also others in the space, and how, if this has been brought up at all, or if there's been any attempts to sort of reconcile this, or if it's not even on people's radars, in your opinion.
Well, labeling is a big thing on our radar because we're concerned about it. We want to make sure that we can convey to the consumer what we're producing in a way that they understand it quickly and fairly by saying, "Hey, look, this isn't meat." We may use a descriptive word here that reminds you of meat and what we're trying to accomplish, but clearly over our packaging we should be very clear that it's plant-based or it's vegan. There should be no way that somebody picks up a package, looks at it, and with and reads it and doesn't understand that this isn't a meat product or a dairy product, or pork product or something of that sort. So we do want to be clear. We're not trying to pull a fast one over the public. We want our consumers to know what they're eating. We're very forthright about that in so many different ways. But we also don't want to be put in a corner, right? We don't want to be told that we have to say this is a wheat burger or a soy burger or a pea burger. And that's what we're looking at today. We want to be able to say this is a plant-based burger or this is a vegan burger, and then look at the ingredients like you do with any other packaging, if you do that, and see that there's soy in there, or there's pea, or there's wheat, or there's chickpea, or whatever else is in there, right? And you have a chance to evaluate it on your own and decide whether or not you want to buy that product. But to slap it in somebody's face is where we are a bit challenged today, and that's what we're looking at, regulation-wise, what we're seeing coming at us. And you're right about the USDA and FDA. I understand that. My sister company is a meat company, and they've got somebody posted in their factory from the USDA watching everything they do. We don't have to do that on the plant-based side of that factory, which is FDA. So where is that drawn? I mean, I understand why they're a little bit perturbed by that, right? A little bit bothered by that, because it is different. And we are making products that in many ways compete with animal-based proteins. There's no question about it. And yet we're regulated differently. I can't fix that. All I know is we follow the rules that are in front of us the best that we can. And we have our own opinion, of course. There's always two sides to every story, right?
Sure. Yeah. I think that's a fair answer and a very thoughtful take. Um, I also think there's a part of this too where, and this is, and again, this is speculation on my part from knowing these folks for a long time, is I think they don't like that there's no reach through legally. Like, for example, that USDA can't tell FDA, please, like, enforce this labeling requirement, because like we have a very specific definition of what a burger is. And you are using it in that way, and again, or misusing it, or whatever their case is. And the same thing with FDA. FDA doesn't have any ability really to reach into USDA. So I feel like a lot of it is just frustration that effectively there's a fragmentation in how these products, which arguably could live under one umbrella because they're sold generally in the same place in a grocery store, could live in the same place and be regulated under one umbrella, but they're not. And I think there's some frustration there, and that's a little in the weeds for the listeners here. But I do think there's some regulatory and like political things that are working against both industries, candidly.
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly dig in deeper. If you get into distribution in the industry, whether it's retail or food service, even the distributors still don't quite know what to do with these products. You know, they now, do they have their buyer for meat buy these type of products, or do they have their produce buyer buy these products? Do they have their frozen buyer buy these products? And it's a really interesting dichotomy that I've dealt with since, you know, I've been doing this now for over 10 years. Um, I guess that makes me one of the old guys in the industry, but
It does.
yeah. What's really interesting is I remember at the very beginning, 10 years ago, working for, you know, what is a competitor of mine now, and who was truly one of the leaders and innovators beyond meat. And I remember going in and talking to the distributors and the buyers, and they were just confused as to what, number one, what we were doing. So most of the time I spent explaining to them how, what, why, what this was all about, right? I don't have to do that anymore. Now everybody gets it, but they still don't get where this belongs, right? They still don't understand.
Where does it belong? Like where are you seeing people? Is there a consensus developing? Is it still? It sounds like it still kind of depends on the person, but where is it landing?
Yeah, I can tell you where I'd like it to land, but I can tell you where it is today. I'll tell you where it is today and where I'd like it to land. Where it is today is there's still a lot of confusion behind it. So, you know, some of them will say, okay, my frozen buyer will buy it because most of these products are frozen, and then they're slacked out at the store or they're in the frozen area, right? To increase the longevity of the products, because they need to be on the shelf a little bit longer than other fresh products that move quicker. Or they're in the meat, maybe the meat buyer buys it. And I've seen a quasi, you know, vegetarian buyers buy it too. So where I think it belongs, it just belongs in each category. Like if it's pork, it should be pork. If it's beef, like it's beef. Like if it's dairy, like it's dairy. Like if it, you know, if it's in the retail and it's a pizza, then whoever buys the pizza buys it. You know, just allocate it that way. Which again, I think it'll just get there. I mean, we see, like, if you go down a frozen aisle in a grocery store today and you're looking for plant-based options, right? If you go into the pizza area and they have a plant-based pizza, it will be with the pizzas, most likely. And the same thing as you go down, you're looking for chicken nuggets. It should be right near the chicken nuggets, but it should be clear that these are different. And I think in most cases, the packaging reflects that. And it's clear that it is a different product, but it should be next to the counterpart that we're trying to mimic, or we're trying to offer an option to the person that doesn't want to eat animal-based protein.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that typically makes sense. I think the plant-based milk alternatives have really sort of, I think, set the appropriate tone, which is like, treat your customers as a, you know, that as if they have brains in their heads.
Yeah.
And let them make a decision. Like, put it in a logical place, basically, where you would go look for things,
Yeah.
and then let them make that decision through important labeling. We just had Dr. Susan Main on the show, who used to run the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition, one of my former bosses. And her, you know, the front of pack labeling looks like it's going to be going out. And I think that's going to help, you know, as best as possible as well. With for those that are listening, you'll get a small little nutrition pack, like, label on the front of the package that'll tell you at a glance what's different, or if there is anything different.
Yeah.
But
I wish we were leading that charge. We're actually followers when it comes to that. They're already doing that down in Mexico and other parts of the world. It's interesting that we're jumping on board after it's already happened elsewhere.
well, I will say, in the world of food safety, any time is good time, frankly, to update or continue to make things food safer. So I agree with you, but I also see it as like, I'm glad we're doing it.
Yeah.
Related, you mentioned Beyond Meat, and you know, again, early on, I think a lot of the messaging from, like, for example, your competitors, Impossible and Beyond, reversing climate change, or you know, was sort of a front and center. Even the packages were green, to denote sort of a clean, climate friendly sort of messaging. And that even since then, I think most of them have moved away from this to more reds and fast food and meat centric labeling. But you know, it seems like climate change is not a compelling reason for most folks to change their diets. And health, to a lesser extent, isn't either, despite those both being empirically true. And we watched both Impossible and Beyond play this card for years, and you mentioned this early on, and despite that initial success, we saw the bottom drop out of the plant-based world up until months ago. So what do you think changed in terms of sort of getting people back interested in these products? Because we are seeing them turn profits now, and that they're getting their heels back in. And what are you doing in your companies that you think are similar or different, and that you think will bring folks on this journey with you?
Well, I don't think a lot has changed. I think the companies are becoming more efficient and more aware of how to produce and how to scale up, as we spoke about earlier. And a lot of the companies that had struggled have already disappeared, have fallen out. So it's given us an opportunity to pick up some business that perhaps we would have been more competitive with other companies that are gone now. So I think that's part of the key there. I think we have an opportunity for growth going forward based on what I spoke about earlier. Is that now it's more grassroots. We're not seeing these multi-million-dollar campaigns with influencers to talk about the products in the same way we did previously when the industry kind of blew up overnight. And I don't think we'll see a lot of that anymore because the return on investment was not very good. It was very short term and it wasn't long term. So all of us in the industry have to look into the long term application about what we do when it has to do with education about our products and marketing our products. And I think that's the key right now, is I think we've realized that the public and the consumer is looking for products like these because they want to feel like they're eating an animal-based protein. And one of the best ways to do that is to, I mean, you said going from green to red. You know, Impossible did that in a very big way. And I think they're doing okay because of that. I think they're not shy to say, hey, look, we are plant-based. We're proud of it. But we're making products that are similar to what you're used to eating in the meat world. And therefore, we want to kind of show it off that way, that these are meat-like products. And they changed their look. And I think it was a good move for them. Beyond is doing something a little bit different. They're trying to really jump on the part of the industry today that is looking to produce healthier, cleaner products. So I guess Impossible kind of went one way, Beyond went the other way, and my company is kind of going right up the middle, if that makes sense, because that's what we've done from the very beginning. We've been able to, I guess, jump on their coattails because they had the hundreds of millions of dollars to go out there and promote the industry, and we've been fortunate to be a part of that from early on. And we're excited to be part of the next stage and the next step. And we are producing, I'll tell you, up until about a year ago, we were producing all alternate meat products. Last year, we started developing old-fashioned veggie burger, right? And because that's what the consumers are asking for. So we're out there listening the best that we can. Now, that veggie burger is actually vegan. A lot of veggie burgers are not because they have either egg or cheese or maybe both. And we use a plant-based egg and a plant-based cheese, so it's a vegan product. But that could be our biggest, or certainly our fastest growing item this year is a old-fashioned, or new fashioned is probably a better word, veggie burger. And we're really excited about it because we are listening to what the consumer is asking for. A portion of the consumer base is saying, hey, look, we like what you're doing. We're not going to stop eating it, but we kind of like to get back to, and I want to see my veggies in the product that I eat. So we're doing that. So I think that is one of the big things here, Eric, is listening and reacting and responding to the consumer. And this industry is getting better at that. We're learning it. We're still so young. I know vegetarian and vegan products have been around for a long time, but products that were specifically made to mimic dairy, to mimic meat, pork, chicken, beef, that's a very young industry, very young. And I'm talking, you can put your two hands together and really say, hey, it's within that time frame. And so it's a learning process. Every industry goes through it. There's hills and valleys. We dropped into the valley and now we're climbing back up the hill.
Do you think that's really interesting that you say this? Do you think that the consumer demand for these sort of more traditional plant-based burgers is a reaction to the ultra processed narrative, or do you think that, or people just wanting to, I don't know, have apply modern technologies to a well-hewn technology, like getting a familiar thing in front of them if they've eaten those before? Like, where do you see what's driving that notion to get back to that type of product?
Yeah, I think I got a feel for that prior to this big push on ultra processed foods, and
Mm.
now it's playing into it is a better description for that. I think we certainly had the consumer saying, "Hey, I don't want to say the consumer said I've had enough of these products," because they haven't. They're still buying them, but I'm looking for something different. Or I remember when I used to go into the local diner 10 years ago or 15 years ago and get myself a good veggie burger, right, where I can see the vegetables coming out of it, and I kind of like to have that as an option too. I think that kind of started before this ultra process started, and then the ultra process certainly pushed it. There's no question about that, because if I put a alt meat burger in front of somebody and then I put a veggie burger in front of somebody, I would venture to guess that 99.9% would say the veggie burger is healthier for them, right? They're seeing the carrots and the corn and the mushrooms and the onions and whatever else may be in that veggie burger, and immediately they're saying that's a healthier choice. And I think that's where it's coming from. So I think there's a balance here, and we're going to find what that balance is. But we dove into that, and I don't know that our competitors are working on anything like that. I'm not sure that's in their playbook, but I don't have a playbook like that. My playbook is what is the consumer asking for us to do, and that's what we're hearing today.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, obviously, I'm a very motivated. So I'm a reducitarian, or at least I consider myself one, and I know that I'm never going to give up meat fully. Um,
Mhm.
and
You're our
but I
biggest
also know
customer, by the way.
that is, and the thing is, like, for me, I want to find a way to switch over completely, but I just don't believe I found a suite of products yet that completely get me there. Like, for price, availability, and sort of the sensory experiences I would expect. And that's what motivated me to get into cultivated meat and build that product.
Mhm.
Um, is I wanted to replace my guilt with something that would be guilt free. And I think a lot of consumers are like me, actually. They know the effect they're having and on the planet, on animals, but they also know they're not going to give it up. So, like, what's the alternative? And I'm always thinking, what could get us there?
Yeah.
What could actually win over a person like I think the large block of consumers like
Yeah.
me? And I wonder if I'm assuming you put a lot of thought into this, but
Yeah. I have a
what is it
one-word
going to
answer.
take? What's the ideal product, maybe, that sort of
I,
wins us
I have
over?
a one-word answer for you. Time. Time. And then I could add education to that, and certainly, the adjustment in people's diet. Look, it's difficult to be a meat eater. Look, I grew up in the Midwest, meat and potatoes, right? Six brothers and sisters, good old fashioned family, growing up with all of us at the table, digging in family style, right? There was always meat and there were always starch on the table, and a little bit of vegetables, which nobody wanted to eat, right? Um, Today I'm vegan, and I have been for some time. It was not a choice because of what I do. It was a choice because of how I feel, right? Personally, and I mean in different ways. Certainly, physically, for me personally, I feel better, but I also feel better about what I'm doing to help the environment and the animals as well. So it's trifold for me. Some people it's singular, and they choose one of those things, and it's really important to them. But as we move forward, time is going to make a difference, because as we spoke about earlier, the millennials having babies, those babies, this is what they know. This is what they grow up on. This is what their peers talk about. Right. And I think we're already seeing the beginning of that. And you were talking earlier about, how many people are doing it because of health reasons or environmental reasons, or maybe even because of the animals. Well, I think that is skewed in different ways depending on the generation. If you look at baby boomers, X Gen, if they're interested in these type of products, it's usually health reasons, right? They go in the doctor says, hey, you got to eat a little bit better, maybe take a few pounds off, be active, but eat better. And what's the best way to eat better? Eat more plant-based, right? Really simple. Then maybe you work your way down to the millennials and the Z Gen, and they're concerned maybe about the environment a little bit more than their own personal health, right? Get down to what I believe is Alpha Gen now, the younger generation kids. It's really interesting. I talk to a lot of them, and they're concerned about the animals. They're like, hey, I don't want a little clucky or a little cowy, or why are we doing this? So I think it's a little bit generational when you talk about reasons why people are eating this way or choose to eat this way. But I think over time, it's going to become more clear that the picture is not singular. There are multiple reasons why to choose this way to eat, even if it's the way you do as a reducitarian or a meat reducer or a flexitarian. There's a lot of names for it. And they all apply to the same thing. Hey, we're eating less meat. We're making a conscious choice to eat something which we believe is better for us and maybe better for the environment or the animals. And it's a conscious choice. And I think over time, that is just going to continue to gradually get bigger and bigger and bigger. And what I call the grassroots movement of the plant-based industry has already started. We did a jump start. We backed up a little bit. Now we're moving forward in a conscious way to accept these type of products for what they are. And what they are healthier choices for all three of those categories: our earth, our bodies, and the animals.
I think you're right. When I started at Upside Foods and nearly a decade ago, because I'm an old like you, um, is I knew about vegetarianism, veganism, and I'd make dishes like that, but I didn't really like live it in any, I didn't seek it out. And then what really changed or opened my horizons, I guess, was just like being around people of all different stripes, including like ardent meat eaters. At Upside, and sort of just in general being around people that just had a variety of different ways of describing the way they ate. And there's no right way or wrong way, in my opinion. And I really thought that was, for the first time, I'd never been like, oh, like there's a lot of different ways you can eat and choose to eat foods. And I'm not just like the devil because I continue to eat meat, but I'm trying to reduce it and just being honest about that. And I think a lot of people, if they knew that there were a lot of different options that are just beyond sort of vegetarian veganism, and just like eating meat, I think a lot of people would probably eventually jump on that treadmill to a healthier, maybe less animal based diet. And it sounds like that's sort of part of what got you to where you were as well. Just being exposed to that.
Yeah, being exposed was certainly it certainly made it easier for me. When I went vegan, it was a challenge from a buddy of mine. We go to another friend's gym and we're working out, and he says, "Hey, let's start a little program, 90 days, where we can work out and really get healthy." And I was pretty healthy at the time. I wasn't vegan, but I was more pescatarian at the time. And he was the one. He's my buddy, so he was a little bit overweight, and I wanted to help him. And he challenged me. He said, "Well, why don't you go vegan for the 90 days and see how that goes for you?" And if you know me that well, you'll know that when you challenge me and something's reasonable, I'm going to go for it. So I did. But the one thing I did before I started, 100% plant-based, was I went to my doctor and I got all my vitals checked. And throughout my adult life, I've always kind of had borderline high cholesterol. It runs in my family, or it has. And so I did that. And I also, when I started, I meal prepped, because I didn't look, I've been around the industry, but I didn't know how to eat that way. And it's not an easy transition to make, but going from one diet to another is not an easy thing to do either. But I also decided this: it wasn't a diet for me. It was a lifestyle. And I think that whatever people do today, they make choices for their lifestyle. And that's when it'll work. 95% of diets fail within the first 5 years or less. It just doesn't work. And people gain that weight back if that's what they're trying to do. And they go off the wagon, right? So what's important here is that whatever choices you make, whether you choose to be vegetarian, vegan, flexitarian, reducitarian, meat reducer, or carnivore diet, whatever you do, you do it in moderation, right? And you have it's got to be part of your lifestyle. So if you want to be healthy and you want to make the right choices, make a lifestyle choice. Don't make a diet choice. Diet choices aren't healthy. Lifestyles are. I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but I guess, anyways, after 90 days, I just felt fantastic. I mean, I slept better. My mind was clear. My body literally flushes out every single morning. There was no reason for me to go off that diet. I didn't have plans necessarily to continue to be a vegan. And I've been a vegan for going on 9 years now. It worked for me. And I built my life around that. It was my lifestyle. It helps that I was, running a plant-based company, but at the same time, I was making choices in a full circle, not just singular toward whatever I was eating. And my cholesterol dropped 70 points, which was huge.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people do come to this, or do arrive at maybe veganism or vegetarianism. Also do it, I think, primarily from maybe start from a health perspective, and then realize if they commit to it, they feel better, or in ways that are matter to them. I'm really curious how, like, we've talked a lot about like where we've come from and sort of where we are. I'm curious, what is the next frontier for plant-based foods? You mentioned that you're going, and in your case, in some ways, it's going back to making this better conventional plant-based patty. What are, just broadly speaking, and from your expertise, like, what are folks now thinking about in terms of technologies and products and consumers? I'll say that it sounds like there's somewhat of a split in that, and that's not a bad thing. We had Jack Bobo on there as a food futurist, and he is like, if you're making a burger, it's an indulgence. Like, you should not be trying to make it healthy. Like, burgers are not healthy. And so he's got this whole mindset around, like, you should be leaning into that. Like, that's what makes burgers successful, is they're not healthy. Like, they're an indulgence, they're a treat. And then the other end, I think we're trying to also sell that they are cleaner alternatives to those indulgences. So first off, do you see that sort of dichotomy developing at all? And if so, I'm curious about that. But also, how does that play into the larger technology platform that you see developing?
Yeah, it's a big challenge. I mean, that's been a challenge since the beginning. I think it's become even clearer how big of a challenge that is, because we're in a position where we're creating products that are mimicking animal-based proteins, and in most cases, especially with the burger, and the burger is probably, without question, taken the biggest hit in the last year and a half over all the products that are available. I mean, at least I know with Before the Butcher, with my company, we've seen dramatic challenges selling the burger compared to other products that we make that are more ingredient based. So chicken chunks, grounds, slices, things like that you would absolutely use in a recipe, rather than just saying, hey, I got this burger I'm putting on a bun and I'm eating it. It better be juicy and delicious and just like I remember. Because honestly, the plant-based burgers aren't. They aren't. They're as much as we've worked on making them as juicy and delicious, they're not going to be, and they are a healthier option because of that. So if you're talking about that indulgent, greasy, dripping burger, that's not what you get from a plant-based burger. You just don't. But the flip side of this is what we're seeing going forward, I think, are more ingredients-based products, and on the other side are whole meats, whole cuts. So, a whole steak, a whole, chicken breast, things like that. Now, for us, my company, we're not going after that side of it. The ingredient based is more important to us because we think there's so many more applications, and because it's economically viable. When you're making a plant-based steak, it is a very complex structure that goes behind creating that product, and because of that complexity and everything that goes into it, it's expensive. and it's difficult to make, and even scaling up will be challenging, because scaling up to make a steak compared to scaling up to make a burger is 1 compared to 100, right? Yeah, you're going to sell 100 burgers for every steak, or more. Maybe it's probably not even that close. So understanding that the industry went after the high targets is true. I mean, for us, we released a new product last year, was our pepperoni. Well, pepperoni is a beautiful thing, because, every corner you turn, you see a pizza shop, right? Somebody selling pizza, right? Just like you see hamburger, you see a place selling hamburgers and a place selling pizza, bing, 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 all over the place, right? So we went after the ones that are going to, we think, grow in a big way. Certainly a veggie burger can be at your local coffee shop, and it can be at your chain that's got, 500 locations across the country, all over the place. And you've got burger chains too, and you've got pizza chains, and you've got coffee. So those are opportunities everywhere. We make chicken chunks, we make grounds. All of those are applications for recipes. Many of those products today we're seeing being diversified into ethnic like foods. So you'll see your Korean beef. You'll see your the Italian sausage, or some other ethnic type food, birria and stuff like that. Whatever's cool on the animal-based protein side can be cool on our side too. And I think we're going to see more and more of that, because that works, and because it creates the thing that the consumer is looking for. And the consumer, when they're looking at these type of products, are looking for comfort food, something they're familiar with. And we can do that. And I think we're going to see more of that. In fact, I know we're going to see more of that.
That goes to one of the questions I was really excited to ask you too, was it sounds like you have a pretty good relationship with your competitors in your own industry. I'm curious, what's your philosophy around, building bridges with incumbents in the meat industry? You said you sister companies a meat company.
Yeah.
How do you approach bridge building and working alongside, the giants and the Davids, the Goliaths, and everything in between? And sort of, do you think more people should have the strategy you're using, or do you see it working?
Well, I think I think we start amongst ourselves in a lot of different ways. We can do that. I'm on the board of the Plant-Based Foods Association, and the beauty of the Plant-Based Foods Association is many of the companies that we talk about today, most of them are part of that association. Just like you've got your pork association, your beef and dairy association, we have the same thing. And we just need to be a little bit more focused. We don't have all the money behind us like some of those other associations have. So focus is really important, and getting, on Capitol Hill and talking about what our needs are, that, hey, we are somebody out there, and you need to, it's important to listen to us, because we have something to tell you that is important for all of us. The crossover with the meat industry or the dairy industry, I think it's there. I think we just need to be friendly with each other. I think there's enough for all of us out there. If you're losing business, it's not because of us. We're not making that big of an impact. I wish we were making a bigger impact, and I think it will be seen going forward. And I think that's perhaps where the greatest fear is not where we are today. It's where we're going to be in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years. That's the fear of the Cattlemen's Association or the Dairy Association or the Pork Association. That's their greatest fear. It's not what we're doing today, because we've not made a big impact, with the exception of the dairy industry, specifically meat. I mean, not meat, I'm sorry, milk. But outside of that, no. So I think having those conversations about what we're doing and what we can do together is more important than what we're doing separately. And I hope we can have more of those conversations.
Agreed. I think there's a lot of common ground, actually, between innovators and startups and the biggest players and the incumbents. I think there's a ton of common ground, actually, and a lot of shared goals. which makes me excited for the future. And speaking of, lastly, what advice would you give to the motivated consumer that's listening to this show, and if that would be different from anything you tell these a lot of vested policymakers who also listen to this this as well?
Give us a chance. Hang in there. There's a lot of really cool things that are going to be coming from this industry. There's a lot of innovators out there and new companies. Look, it's integrated into our system now, what we're doing. There are many colleges across the country that have plant-based programs that are teaching these younger people how to make things like this and how to make them better and how to listen to what the consumer's asking for and what we need as a society, what we have to have, what is not going to be a choice in years to come. Fortunately, we're doing it now, right? And yeah, the environment might have been a big part of that push, and I would say that it was. And going forward, how are we doing, and what are we doing to protect the earth, this precious earth that we're on, that we're all living on, that's alive and struggling? We have to find a way to help it, right? In addition to our own health. I mean, the health of the people in the United States specifically is not that great, right? There's a lot of obesity here. And we as a society, we as manufacturers of products that are consumed by people here in the US and around the world, we have to be conscious of that. And I'm not talking just to the plant-based industry. I'm certainly talking the food industry as a whole, which I think has failed in many ways. And failure sometimes is the openness of what we can do to make those changes going forward. So understanding what we did wrong should help us to understand what we need to do to make it right. And I hope we figure that out. I think we get it. We just have to do it. And that's what we have to do, all of us together, not just the plant-based industry or the meat industry. It has to be the industry, period.
Well said. Danny O'Malley, thank you so much for being on Food Truths today.
I hope we got the truth that we needed there. I feel like we did.
We did.
Thanks,
for those of you listening at home, thank you again for listening to Food Truths on the Spoon Podcast Network. And stay tuned for the next episode, wherever you get your podcasts.